The fluorescent lights in the downtown law office hummed with that particular frequency that made Marcus Williams' temples throb. He adjusted his tie for the third time in 5 minutes, the silk feeling more like a noose around his neck as he stared at the mahogany conference table that stretched before him like an accusatory finger. The smell of expensive leather and old money hung in the air, mixed with the faint aroma of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath gray November clouds, its lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. Marcus had built his reputation on being unshakable. 23 years as a corporate attorney, partner at Whitmore and Associates for the last 8, and not once had he walked into a room feeling this particular cocktail of dread and anticipation. But then again, he'd never faced a discrimination lawsuit quite like this one. If you've ever felt that moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself gets called into question, you'll understand why hitting that subscribe button might be the least of your worries right now. The door opened with a soft click, and she walked in. Keisha Thompson moved with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from surviving storms others couldn't even imagine. Her navy blue suit was impeccable, her natural hair styled in a way that spoke of both professionalism and pride. She carried a worn leather briefcase that had clearly seen years of battles, and when she set it down on the table, the sound echoed in the silence like a gavel falling. "Mr. Williams," she said, extending her hand. Her voice carried the slight rasp of someone who had spent countless hours arguing cases, fighting for justice in courtrooms where she was often the only person who looked like her. Marcus stood, his 6-foot frame suddenly feeling inadequate. "Ms. Thompson, I have to say, I'm surprised you agreed to this meeting." Keisha's smile was enigmatic. Surprises seem to be the theme lately, don't they? She was referring, of course, to the lawsuit that had landed on Marcus's desk 3 weeks ago. Keisha Thompson versus Whitmore and Associates, alleging systematic discrimination, hostile work environment, and wrongful termination. On paper, it looked like every other disgruntled employee case Marcus had handled over the years. The kind of thing that got settled quietly for a modest sum and a non-disclosure agreement. But there was something in Keisha's eyes that suggested this case would be anything but routine. "Before we begin," Marcus said, settling back into his chair, "I want you to know that my client is prepared to offer a very generous settlement. We could have this whole matter resolved today." Keisha opened her briefcase with deliberate slowness. The leather creaked softly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of meticulously organized files, each tab labeled in precise handwriting. "Mr. Williams, may I ask you something?" "Of course. How long have you been with Whitmore and Associates?" Marcus frowned. It wasn't the question he'd expected. 23 years. I started as a junior associate right out of law school. And in those 23 years, how many black partners has the firm had?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt his collar tighten. "I don't see how that's relevant to—" "Zero," Keisha said quietly. "The answer is 0. In a firm of 47 partners, spanning over 60 years of operation, in a city that's 38% black, there have been 0 black partners." Marcus shifted in his seat. "Ms. Thompson, I understand you're upset about your termination, but making this about race—" "Oh, this was about race long before I walked through those doors," Keisha interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an edge that made Marcus's stomach clench. "The question is whether you're going to acknowledge that fact or continue pretending it's just a coincidence." She pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it on the table between them. The tab read "Documentation" in that same precise handwriting. "Tell me about Janet Morrison," Keisha said. Marcus blinked. "Janet? She was a paralegal. Retired last year. 34 years with the firm. Started the same week as your current senior partner, Richard Whitmore, Jr. Tell me, Mr. Williams, why do you think Janet remained a paralegal for 34 years while Richard became senior partner? Different career paths, different qualifications. Janet has a law degree from Howard University, graduated summa cum laude, passed the bar on her first try." Keisha's fingers drummed once against the folder. "She applied for associate positions 17 times over the years. 17 times, Mr. Williams. Can you guess how many interviews she was granted?" Marcus felt something cold settling in his chest. "I wouldn't know the specifics." Three interviews in 34 years. And each time, she was told she wasn't quite the right fit for the firm's culture. Keisha leaned forward slightly. "Now, I'm curious about something. What exactly is the firm's culture?" The question felt like a trap, and Marcus found himself thinking about the partners' retreat last summer, the golf games where deals were made, the private club dinners where clients were wooed, the casual conversations about wives and kids and vacation homes in the Hamptons. He thought about how many times he'd heard the phrase cultural fit used to describe why certain candidates just weren't right for Whitmore and Associates. "We value excellence, integrity, and teamwork," he said, reciting what felt like a script. "Interesting." Keisha opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It was the firm's annual holiday party from 2 years ago. All 47 partners and their spouses gathered in the main conference room. Marcus remembered the evening well. Good wine, expensive catering, everyone in their finest attire. "Can you spot the pattern here, Mr. Williams?" Marcus looked at the photo and felt his mouth go dry. 47 partners, 47 white faces, their spouses, also overwhelmingly white. The few people of color in the photo were clearly staff members, standing at the edges, serving drinks or clearing plates. This doesn't prove, by itself. No. Keisha pulled out another document. "But let's talk about the Hartwell Industries case." Marcus's blood pressure spiked. The Hartwell case had been his biggest win last year, a complex merger that had netted the firm nearly $2 million in fees. It had also secured his position as the firm's go-to attorney for high-stakes corporate deals. What about it? Who did the initial research on Hartwell's regulatory compliance issues? Marcus hesitated. He knew where this was going, and he didn't like it. Several people contributed to that research. "I did the research, Mr. Williams. 47 hours over 3 weeks, identifying the regulatory gaps that became the foundation of your entire strategy. My name appears on exactly 0 documents related to that case." She pulled out a stack of papers, each one marked with timestamps and digital signatures, research memos, legal briefs, strategy documents, all bearing Keisha's electronic signature, all dated weeks before Marcus had presented the winning strategy to the Hartwell executives. "I also identified the precedent cases you cited in your closing argument, the ones that convinced the judge to approve the merger." Keisha's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the controlled anger in her eyes. "Tell me, when you accepted that commendation from the State Bar Association for outstanding legal work on the Hartwell case, did you think about mentioning the black woman who actually did the work?" The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Marcus loosened his tie and tried to find his footing. Legal work is collaborative. Everyone contributes, but only some people get credit." Keisha pulled out another photo, this one from the State Bar Association dinner where Marcus had received his award. There he was, shaking hands with the governor, holding a crystal plaque, smiling for the cameras. I wasn't even invited to the ceremony." Marcus stared at the photo and felt something shifting inside him, like tectonic plates realigning. He remembered that night, the pride he'd felt, the way his wife had beamed at him from the audience. He remembered his acceptance speech, where he'd thanked his team at Whitmore and Associates for their support. He hadn't mentioned Keisha by name. "Ms. Thompson," he said slowly, "I want you to know that any oversight in recognition was not intentional." "Oversight?" Keisha repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" She reached into her briefcase again and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Before we continue, I want to play something for you." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What is that?" "A conversation that took place in Richard Whitmore's office 6 months ago, the day before I was terminated." Keisha's finger hovered over the play button. "I should mention that I was in the office next door, working late, when this conversation occurred. The walls in that old building are thinner than you might think." She pressed play. The audio quality was muffled but clear enough to understand. Marcus recognized the voices immediately. Richard Whitmore, Jr., senior partner, and David Chen, the firm's managing partner. "Getting too ambitious." Richard's voice crackled through the speaker. "She's been asking questions about partnership track, about why her cases keep getting reassigned." "She's good at what she does," David's voice replied. "Maybe too good. The Hartwell research was exceptional. That's exactly the problem. She's making some of our senior associates look bad. And frankly, David, I'm not sure she fits the image we want to project to our clients." "What do you mean?" There was a pause, and Marcus could hear papers rustling. "Come on, David. You know what I mean. Our clients expect a certain aesthetic. Old money, old families, old traditions." Keisha Thompson, for all her talents, doesn't exactly scream Whitmore and Associates. You're talking about her race. I'm talking about brand consistency. We've built our reputation on being the kind of firm that represents the best of traditional American values. Our clients trust us because we look like them, think like them, understand their world. Marcus felt sick. So what are you suggesting? David's voice asked. I'm suggesting we find a reason to let her go before she becomes a bigger problem. Maybe some performance issues, missed deadlines, attitude problems. You know the drill. The recording ended. The silence in the conference room was deafening. Marcus stared at the recorder as if it were a live grenade. That conversation took place on a Tuesday, Keisha said quietly. On Wednesday, I was called into HR and informed that my position was being eliminated due to budget constraints. Funny thing about budget constraints, they hired my replacement the following week, a recent graduate from Yale Law School, white, male, son of a federal judge. Marcus felt like he was drowning. 23 years at Whitmore and Associates, and he'd never seen the firm this clearly. Or maybe he had seen it and chosen not to look. Ms. Thompson, he said, his voice hoarse. I had no idea. Didn't you? Keisha leaned back in her chair, studying him with those penetrating eyes. In 23 years, you never noticed that every black attorney who joined the firm seemed to leave within 2 years? You never wondered why the partners' meetings looked like a country club from 1955? You never questioned why the most complex, high-profile cases always went to the same group of white male attorneys? Marcus thought about his career, about the cases he'd won, the recognition he'd received, the partnerships he'd been offered. He thought about the conversations in the partners' lounge, the casual comments about cultural fit and client expectations. He thought about how many times he'd heard colleagues make jokes about diversity initiatives, about how hiring the right people was getting more complicated these days. He thought about Keisha Thompson, working late into the night, producing brilliant legal research that would be credited to others, attending firm events where she was often the only black face in a sea of white colleagues. And he realized that he had known, maybe not consciously, maybe not admitting it to himself, but on some level, he had always known. What do you want? He asked quietly. Keisha smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I want justice, Mr. Williams. But more than that, I want change. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I filed a federal complaint against Whitmore and Associates. Systematic discrimination, hostile work environment, retaliation. But here's the thing. I'm not just seeking damages for myself. Marcus felt his world tilting. What do you mean? I mean I've been in contact with 17 other current and former employees of the firm. Black attorneys, Latino paralegals, Asian associates who were passed over for promotion, women who were told they weren't partner material because they might want to have children someday. Keisha's voice gained strength with each word. We're filing a class action lawsuit, Mr. Williams, and we're not interested in settling quietly. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. A class action discrimination lawsuit would destroy the firm's reputation, cost millions in damages, and likely result in federal oversight of their hiring and promotion practices. It would be front-page news in the legal journals, a cautionary tale about institutional racism in corporate America. But, Keisha continued, I'm willing to consider an alternative. Marcus looked up sharply. What kind of alternative? Full admission of wrongdoing, public apology, complete overhaul of hiring and promotion practices with external oversight, establishment of a diversity and inclusion program with real teeth, and, she paused, letting the weight of her words settle. A partnership for me and 2 other qualified black attorneys currently working at the firm. Partnership? Marcus's voice cracked. Keisha, I don't have the authority to... Then get someone who does. Keisha closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. You have 48 hours to present this proposal to your partners. After that, the story goes public, and we proceed with the federal lawsuit. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Williams, can I ask you something personal? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Do you have children? A daughter. She's 16. What would you want for her? What kind of world would you want her to inherit? Marcus thought about Sarah, his brilliant, ambitious daughter who wanted to be a lawyer like her father. He thought about the conversations they'd had about justice and equality, about how proud she was of his work. He thought about what she would say if she knew the truth about Whitmore and Associates. I'd want her to live in a world where talent and hard work matter more than the color of your skin, he said quietly. Keisha nodded. Then you know what you have to do. After she left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room for a long time, staring at the city lights beyond the windows. He thought about his career, about the cases he'd won and the recognition he'd received. He thought about the system that had elevated him while keeping others down, and about his role in perpetuating that system. He thought about Keisha Thompson, brilliant and determined, fighting not just for herself, but for everyone who had been denied opportunities because of prejudice and fear. And he thought about his daughter, and the world he wanted to leave for her. The partners' meeting the next morning was unlike any in the firm's history. Marcus had called an emergency session, and as he looked around the mahogany table at his colleagues, 46 white faces staring back at him with varying degrees of confusion and concern, he felt the weight of the moment. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "we have a problem, a big one." He laid out everything: the recording, the documentation, the federal complaint, the class action lawsuit. He watched as faces went pale, as whispered conversations broke out around the table, as the reality of their situation sank in. Richard Whitmore, Jr. was the first to speak. "This is extortion, pure and simple. We don't negotiate with disgruntled employees who make wild accusations." "They're not wild accusations, Richard." Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade. "They're facts, documented, recorded, undeniable facts." He played the recording of Richard's conversation with David Chen. The silence that followed was deafening. That conversation was private. Richard sputtered. It was taken out of context. "What context makes systematic discrimination acceptable?" Marcus asked. "What context makes it okay to deny qualified people opportunities because of their race?" The room erupted in arguments, denials, and finger-pointing. Some partners insisted they'd done nothing wrong, that the firm's hiring practices were based purely on merit. Others worried about the financial implications of a lawsuit, the damage to their reputation, the potential for federal oversight. But Marcus wasn't listening to the noise anymore. He was thinking about a question that had been haunting him since his conversation with Keisha. What would you do if you discovered that everything you'd built your career on was fundamentally unjust? "I'm resigning from the firm," he announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. The room fell silent. "Marcus, don't be hasty," David Chen said. "We can fight this." "We can fight what, David?" "The truth." Marcus stood, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I've spent 23 years here, and I've been complicit in a system that denies opportunities to qualified people because of their race. I won't be part of that anymore." He looked around the table one more time, at the faces of men who had been his colleagues, his friends, his partners in building what they'd all believed was a prestigious legal practice. "You have a choice," he said. "You can accept Keisha Thompson's proposal, admit your mistakes, and work to build a better firm. Or you can fight the lawsuit and watch everything you've built crumble in the most public way possible." He walked toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you choose justice. Your children and grandchildren will be watching." The aftermath moved quickly. Within a week, Whitmore and Associates had accepted Keisha's proposal in full. The public apology made headlines in legal journals across the country. The firm committed to a complete overhaul of their hiring and promotion practices, with oversight from an independent diversity consultant, and Keisha Thompson, along with 2 other qualified black attorneys, was offered full partnership. Marcus started his own practice, focusing on employment law and civil rights cases. His first client was a young Latina attorney who had been passed over for promotion at her firm despite outstanding performance reviews. 6 months later, Marcus received a call from his daughter Sarah. "Dad, I saw the article about you in the law review, about the discrimination case in your new practice." Marcus held his breath, unsure what she would say. "I'm proud of you," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion, "for doing the right thing, even when it was hard. That's the kind of lawyer I want to be." As Marcus hung up the phone, he thought about Keisha Thompson and the courage it had taken for her to stand up to a system designed to keep her down. He thought about the other attorneys who had joined her lawsuit, she finding strength in numbers and solidarity and shared experience. He thought about the changes happening at Whitmore and Associates, where new policies were being implemented and diverse voices were finally being heard in partnership meetings. And he thought about his daughter, who would inherit a legal profession that was slowly, painfully, but inevitably becoming more just. The transformation wasn't complete, it might never be complete, but it had begun. And sometimes, Marcus reflected. That's how change happens. Not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the quiet courage of individuals who decide that justice matters more than comfort, that truth matters more than tradition. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think about the systems and institutions in your own life, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because change happens when we stop being silent, when we stop being complicit, when we choose to stand up for what's right even when it costs us something. The fluorescent lights in Marcus's new office hummed with a different frequency, one that somehow felt more hopeful. Outside his window, the city sprawled beneath clearing skies, its lights twinkling with possibility. And somewhere across town, Keisha Thompson was preparing for another case, another fight for justice, another chance to change everything. Because sometimes, what starts as a joke, the idea that one person can make a difference, that justice can prevail, that systems can change, becomes the most serious and important work of our lives.